What do we do when we're in anguish or like deep despair? Well, there's this person in the Bible, her name is Hannah, and she went through quite a challenging time in her life. So it starts off in the book of Samuel, really the first chapter. So to give you a summary of kind of where we are in the Bible, the people of Israel are living in the promised land during the time of the judges. And Samuel marks the end of the judges. So essentially, it would be like Israel was supposed to be a nation, but instead it was kind of like each tribe of Israel was ruling for themselves, so they weren't really united. And during this time, there was a woman, and her name was Hannah. And Hannah could not have children. Now, this was a really big deal back in the day because it basically showed the first sign of your strength if you were a male. It's how you pass down your family name. It's how a wife would honor her husband. And while a lot of those stereotypes have disappeared over years past, you have to understand that really Hannah's biggest life goal was to have a child. She was married to a man that had another wife, and he did love her, but his other wife had children and she didn't. So this made her quite upset. And we see her every year she'd go to the tabernacle. Now remember, the tabernacle is the presence of God. This is where God lived in Israel and on the earth, was in the tabernacle at this time. So she would go there, and it says this in 1 Samuel 1:10, Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow, O Lord of heaven armies, if you look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer, and give me a son, then I will give him back to you, and he will be yours for his entire life. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, he will never cut his hair. And while she's praying, the priest comes up to her and says, You must be drunk, he demanded. Throw away your wine. So she's weeping in a way that makes her look kind of drunk, makes her look kind of crazy. And I don't know if you've ever been there before where you're crying out to God like that, but I have, and it's not exactly a fun experience. But I think what Hannah does that's so beautiful is that she has all this anger and pain and confusion, yet she points it to one place. She points it to heaven. She points it to God. And she brings her lament and her sorrow to him. And then he answers her prayer. She gets a baby boy and she dedicates him to the Lord. What's so beautiful about Samuel is that Samuel is growing up in a place of wicked people. That the people that were serving God were not good people. They were not following him. But it talks about but Samuel, though he was only a boy, served the Lord. And he grew up in the presence of God, is what it talks about in chapter 2. And through this, God reminds him of who he is. God is constantly there with him. And what's kind of funny is in chapter 3, God starts speaking to Samuel. Now, God, I don't believe he commonly speaks to people like I'm speaking to you, because if he did, a deaf man couldn't hear him. But in the Old Testament, he would do it regularly with his prophets. Now, God can do anything. I'm not limiting him. But once the New Testament comes and the Holy Spirit comes inside of believers, his actions seem to change. However, he can do whatever he pleases. He is God. So he's calling out to Samuel, but Samuel doesn't recognize God's voice. He calls out to him twice. He doesn't recognize God's voice. And the prophet at the time basically tells him, like, this is God calling to you. You need to go back to your room and wait for him to call again, and then say that you're ready to answer. So if you are at this point right now where you're in anguish and you're crying out to God and you don't know what to do, I think A, just point your attention to heaven, and B, be attentive and listening for an answer that is not your own heart, because commonly I hear when people say, God told me to do something and it's objectively against his word, I can guarantee he didn't tell you to do that. But listen for the voice of God and then be attentive to when he answers. I hope this builds your faith and encourages you to walk with God. I make videos like this every day to help you read through the Bible. We're actually reading through the entire Bible this year. If you want to join along with me, then there's more information in the description of this video. But if not, then just hit subscribe, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.